Today's intention is to be humble. All right, so I'm going to have an opportunity to talk a lot about myself today and my experiences. So it's really important today that I'm intentionally humble. It's not about me. It's about inspiring others to be intentional.
Hey, it's Bobby. Welcome to Student of Intention, where we help you enjoy the pursuit of purpose. Remember, don't wait. Start small. Learn as you go. Hey, friends. Welcome to Student of Intention. This is our place where we enjoy the pursuit of purpose. I am coming into today's show just chock full of positivity. I'm feeling full of prosperity, abundance, everything that I think we all have. And if you're listening to this right now, let this serve as a reminder. You are exactly where you need to be. And we are just cruising along here with season 2. As you know, if you listen to the previous episodes, we are discussing the 5 buckets framework. The 5 buckets is a framework that served as the catalyst for my own transformation, as well as this podcast, the Student of Intention newsletter, and community. We've covered relationships, we've covered creativity, we've covered health, and today we are featuring a discussion with community member Alex Gafford to discuss the learning bucket. But before we do, I want to share a little lesson that came my way. You see, just earlier, I guess it was last week, I wasn't feeling so taken care of, so full of abundance, so surrounded with prosperity. I had kind of a lack of clarity, a little uncertainty creep up. I would say I kind of woke up feeling that way. And I literally went to my wife, Tracy, at our coffee table. And I said, does any of this living with intention stuff even matter? Yeah. The host of Student of Intention asked that question, as crazy as it sounds. And luckily I've surrounded myself with just really good friends and really good mentors, and my wife too. She just listens and sort of doesn't respond, doesn't overreact, because she's just as stable as it gets. And so I kind of worked myself through that, through those conversations, through some journaling, and then ultimately through a run on the beach, which is always my best practice to receive and to gain clarity. And then further clarity came from my guy, Jeff Kober. I've shared some of his stuff in the music show. I've shared it here in Student of Intention, and I just couldn't help myself. This dropped in my inbox yesterday, and I thought it worth sharing here with you. Because out of that question, or out of that clarity, again, I kind of found myself saying, like, what is this about? Why does this matter? Why does living with intention matter? Why does self-discovery matter? And wouldn't you know it, a sign, again, dropped in my inbox. So this is from Jeff Kober's Daily Meditations. I subscribe. It comes into my inbox every day. I try to read it every day. And here's a part. It reads this: why study spiritual works? Why meditate? In order to come more into contact with who and what we really are. But toward what end? The more we are able to experience what we truly are, the more we are able to give of ourselves in this world. The more we are able to give of ourselves in this world, the more in alignment with life we will be. The more in alignment with life we are, the better we feel. The better we feel, the more we will be able to give of ourselves. And on it goes, et cetera, et cetera. He goes on to say, we are here to express life, to express spirit, to give of ourselves to each other. In order to give of ourselves, we must be ourselves. Not the needy, partial, frightened self of the ego, but rather the true self, the higher self, the God within. That part of us that is always in touch with eternity, that is never affected by the rough patches of life, that never turns away from its oneness with totality. This identity is always awaiting my attention, ready to flow through me as soon as I give the word. and I can give the word anytime. I can give the word now. Whoosh. I would have tried to share exactly what I was saying, but that just articulated it so well, or what I was thinking, I should say. And as my friend Alex here said at the top of the show, today's intention is to be humble. It's not about us. It's about all of us figuring ourselves out. It's about all of us living with intention. So with that, I'll introduce Alex. He is a VP, I should say, of Blue Street Capital. More importantly, he's an executive, a husband, a father, and a lifelong learner. Alex and I go way back. We met at our very first job together, a little place we call Sea Beyond, which is a loaded word that we may or may not go down or may not get into. And we reconnected through my work with Student of Intention. It was one of those beautiful moments, of which I've had several, where Alex raised his hand over LinkedIn, I believe, and said, "Hey man, I like what you're doing. Let's catch up." And since then, we've connected more in the last, 8 weeks than we have in the last 8 years. And I'm really excited to talk with Alex specifically about the learning bucket today. 'Cause again, he's a lifelong learner. He's also the community's resident Southerner with the chillest voice in the community. So Alex, welcome to Student of Intention.
Thank you. Don't oversell my voice. I'm from the Mississippi Delta, so most of my cousins and people that are from where I grew up have a much thicker accent than me, so don't expect Matthew McConaughey voice over here. But yeah, no, that was spot on introduction. Appreciate that.
You got it. No, Alex Gafford voice is just right for today. It's just thick enough of an accent.
Yeah, you'll catch me out on some Southernisms here and there.
Oh, I'm sure. So let's dive in, man. The reason I invited you onto the show, for the learning bucket, outside of you just being an awesome human being, is you've definitely sort of surfaced in my world as the guy that is really dedicated to learning, in particular reading. And that's something that I've just re-immersed myself in during my transformation. I've always had an interest in writing, not so much reading, although I consider myself a decent reader, wouldn't say I was an avid reader. And I've read more books this year than I probably ever have. And now I'm like getting this inevitable, I think, realization of like, well, I can't read all the books. So I need to figure out my own strategies and in ways of like being intentional about reading and learning. And again, in a short time, you've definitely taught not just myself, but the community, different ways to learn, different ways to prioritize. So, I'm excited to have the conversation. I want to start though with defining learning. So, in the book, I define learning as this practice that provides us perspective. Through learning, we learn more about the lives we want to live, and in that learning are better able to serve our purpose. But that's me. How do you define learning?
I think that's a deeper definition than what I had in mind, because learning is of the utmost importance. It's ingrained in my psyche, and it's something I'm passionate about. You're not learning to achieve something. You're enjoying the learning. It's a lifelong journey. My granddad is 94 years old. He's still reading. He's still learning. It is a lifelong journey. The way that I see learning is it's the intersection of education and experience. And that's just, again, my mom is a teacher, so I've got this heavy education being ingrained in me. And then I've got this heavy experiential through the desire to actually go out and travel and connect with people and learn directly from the source as opposed to just through books. So although we are both fellow readers, we absolutely love to read, and we can geek out on books to a level where it would bore most of your audience. It's not just about reading.
We're going to get to some books, but I really like what you said. this intersection of education and experience.
Right.
And I want to say you've picked up that definition from your family, from a lot of sources of your family. Is that right?
I did, and it's been more balanced in recent years since I met my wife. We've been married now for 8 years. So we met 10 years ago. And when I met her in Huntington Beach, California, so this was, we met 10 years ago, and I had only been to a few countries. You know, that was one of the first questions she asked me, because I was so trying to be cool. Like I had all the book knowledge of the world. My mom is an art teacher, world history teacher. My dad is a bit of a geography buff. I knew the world conceptually. And so she asked me, well, how many countries have you traveled to? Because I was saying, oh, I love travel. I'm like, she called me out, right? So I'm like, Canada, Mexico, and Costa Rica. She's like, well, Costa Rica, there you go. That's kind of not bordering the United States. So that's good. Just totally called me out. I'm like, how many countries have you been to? It was like 60 something. She's now been to almost 70 countries. So her form of education is different than my mom, who is a teacher and has an MFA, Master's in Fine Arts. It's almost like a doctorate in studio art. So I've had that definition has come to me, and it's been more balanced over the years, for sure.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, wow, 70 countries. That's definitely on the experiential side of learning.
And the fact that she's been to the majority of those countries by herself, solo, or she's traveled with her sister backpacking across Central South America, Europe. She was in Africa for almost 2 years, traveling independently by herself.
Well, you said it just got more balanced. I think you also have ties with your grandfather, with your father, with your mom, right? That goes much longer.
Right.
Even though how long have you been married?
So we've been married for 8 years and have 3 kids.
8 years.
Mm-hmm.
Man, congratulations.
Yeah.
I'm over in year 2, feeling still a little bit novice to the old wedding game, but or to the marriage game.
I still feel like that sometimes.
It's always a good, it's good to be a student.
Marriage
of everything,
is a
right?
lifelong learning how to communicate with your spouse. And the crazy thing is we change, we mature, we have different interests. So it's constantly, you don't just learn your spouse once. It's an ongoing learning, going back to the learning bucket. But to answer your question about who has influenced me, I was really thinking about it when you kind of told me I was going to be talking about the learning bucket. Who are my biggest influencers? The obvious answer was, well, my mom. She's a teacher. Education came to mind, but it goes beyond that. So I would have to say my granddad, who we've talked about before. He's Gerald. I don't know if you knew this, Bobby. My full name is Gerald Alexander Gafford III. I'm named after my granddad.
I did not know that, but I love it. It makes sense.
He's known as Captain Gafford, Jerry, Gerald. His sister calls him Gerald. Let's see, Attorney Gafford, Inspector General Gafford. So he has lived this very successful life with a lifetime of stories that not only is a lifetime of lessons for myself, but for my children, my grandchildren, and so on and so forth. So I have to say my granddad has instilled the desire, the passion for learning almost more than anyone by what he's achieved. And there's a lot, I could go into a lot about that. And then second would be my mom. I did mention that she's an art teacher, MFA, world history teacher, very passionate about formal education. There's my wife, I mentioned. She's been to almost 70 countries. She She did not graduate from college, but she more than made up for it and has been very successful in her career before she got promoted to full-time mom. She was making a lot more money than I was in the corporate space at the time when we were in California. So my dad is a bit of an Anglophile, all things British, everything from Beatles to Premier League to British history. He's also a music nut. He's got over 800 vinyl records in his house. And then lastly, I have had the pleasure to get to report directly to my boss is our CEO and founder of Blue Street, and has taken upon himself to do some kind of ongoing coaching beyond just the scope of work, but laying out his methodology on health, planning goals. There's a lot I could get into there that I've learned about more on learning as it applies to the work bucket, as it applies to health. So there is one thing that all 5 of these major influencers have in common, other than the desire, the passion for learning. What do you think that is, Bobby, if you had to guess?
The one thing,
we've already mentioned it earlier in this podcast.
Oh, well, I was going to say connection to Alex Gafford because that's just so easy. But
that's true. That's true.
But I don't know. I really don't know. I'm stumped.
In every single house, you will find books, bookshelves, books in every room. Every single one of these people has a passion for reading.
There you go. So that bled onto you really early on, and now just that love for reading, that interest in reading for just reading's sake. And it's carried on through your relationship with your wife, relationship with your still mentor, right? You still work for this man?
Absolutely. Dave Rhodes
Cool.
is the CEO of Blue Street. He actually just sent me a book today in the mail, which will be part of our book club. So we read a book as a company once a quarter and talk about it at the end.
Dude, you guys do some cool stuff over there. You also have is it a 4-day work week?
It is a 5-hour work day.
Excuse me.
Revolutionary in our industry, which is in corporate finance in the lending space. Think of bankers wearing suit and ties, typical working, burning the midnight oil. We are not required to stay in the office for 8 hours minimum. They want minimum 5 hours. And they're delighted when we can get in the office at 8 in the morning, super focused, just crush our objectives for the day, exceed our KPIs, exceed everyone's expectations. We leave at 1 o'clock, go for a late lunch. The rest of the afternoon, we're surfing, at least for the staff in Huntington Beach.
You're not surfing in Missouri?
Yeah, so Mississippi, Missouri, it's all the same. But
exactly.
No, I get my surfing fix in when I come to visit the home office, and my wife, she's actually from Glendora, which is near Pasadena. So I do love surfing, but it is definitely part of our culture across the company to really have a focus on what we want to accomplish for the day. And there's not all this wasted time. We're not on social media or paying online bills. We're not taking personal calls unless it's an emergency. We're not chit-chatting around the cooler. And sometimes we're not even taking a lunch break. We're just getting in the office, we're working 5 hours, and we're leaving. And the vibe in the office is a blast because everybody's excited. It's like we have a time off, but every day. And our pay, It's not like our pay is less. Everyone's base salary stayed the same. So we all effectively got a pay raise when they lowered the hours. This was 5 years ago. So we're now 5 years working 5 hours a day.
Wow. I didn't know it was that long. That is way ahead of their time with that move. So bravo. But, we gotta stay on track here. Talk about the learning bucket in particular. So
Right.
Agreed, right? Like experience is huge. Obviously the experience of traveling a bunch, the experience of, connecting with different relationships, right? Be it your boss, be it your mom, your dad, your grandpa, et cetera, right? Like you really can't put a value on all that experience gained. But with this show and with the time we have left, like I want to focus on reading because like you mentioned, everyone in your life is, is an avid reader and suggests that we should all be. And I think that's fair. What I like about books in particular is you can create a relationship with an author and other readers, right? That spans space. It spans time, right? It doesn't really matter. We can sort of pick it up whenever. We don't have to be there live in the moment to receive that. And that just, to me, just is such gold, right?
Love
and
it. I agree.
You're surrounded with so many reasons to read, right? Like you even have this book club at work, aside from having, this beautiful 25-hour work week, 5-hour work day.
That's right.
You're in a book club there. We read a lot in the Student of Intention community. And then you have sort of your own way of organizing your reading list.
Right. Yeah. So I have a little bit of a methodology. So, I try to read about 50 books a year. I at least start 50 books. I don't necessarily finish them. So James Clear, the guy that wrote Atomic Habits, it's a fantastic book on that topic, on habits. He was quoted saying, start more books, quit most of them, read the great ones twice. This is the most concise way to encapsulate my methodology. So it's not mine. I didn't come up with this, but this is kind of what works for me. And I do start as many books as I can. And I do finish the ones that I feel like are high value, but I don't just start any book. So I have a lot less that I stop than I start. Most books I start, I do finish because I'm very intentional about what book I'm going to read. So if someone refers me a book, I will solicit people for what books do you recommend in this area or this. I'm known to do that. But if someone says, I recommend you reading this book, I'm not just going to read it if they say I recommend it. It's why do you recommend that I read that book? And then I can kind of gauge if it's right for me at that time. So there are some books, you've recommended some books to me that I've started, or maybe that I've decided this is a great book for me to read at a certain season of my life. Maybe they were too technical or whatever the reason. So the great thing about it is you're in control. You can pick what books you want. I have a running kind of spreadsheet of the books I read each year, and I actually rate them from 1 to 10. And if they're like an 8 or above, I might recommend them to someone. If they're not, I'm not going to recommend that book to someone. But the 10s are usually the books that I read more than once. And like James Clear said, the great ones you read twice, but there are some that are so great that I might read or so applicable to the season of life, I might read it 5 or 6 times. And those are the types of books where I'm pulling them off my shelf and giving them to people. And I've given away many, many copies of some of my favorite books. So I rate 1 to 10. I put a quick synopsis, kind of what I liked, what I didn't like, kind of just a very high level. And then if someone asks me in more detail, it jogs my memory to explain more about what I learned from that book. And then they can gauge for themselves if that book is right for them. So that's kind of the methodology that I use. And most of my family pretty much follows that. I would say Dave, my CEO, who I report to, has the most extreme version of start books, and not necessarily he has a way of just grabbing books just to get the information he wants out of them. So he doesn't read complete books that often. He kind of skims them and picks out exactly what he wants. So he talks about books sometimes. So many books. You're like, how many books do you read? So Go ahead.
On this methodology. So to recap, you start 50 books a year, 50. Is that right?
My goal is to read 50. So I typically at least start 50 books throughout the year.
So you start 50. You have a spreadsheet where you keep track of these things. You rate them. You also take notes. And then you also earmark some books after you start them for later, or maybe even, just quit them completely. And then you also, when you're seeding book referrals, basically, you're going to people and you're asking, hey, what should I read about a certain subject? A question you always ask is why are you recommending that book?
Absolutely. That's very important.
Got it. And when did you start doing this? What drove this sort of organizational methodology?
I don't know. Part of it is actually putting it on paper and formalizing it a little bit more came about through the student of intention, being intentional about my methodology for reading. But I've always had certain books that I put on certain bookshelves that are books that I know I will recommend, and I can tell that person why I'm recommending that book.
Beautiful.
And
we're gonna talk about one book that I know you rated a 10 and you've read 5 times. I'm halfway through it right now, but I want to have some fun with your sheet. I have it pulled up here.
Okay.
I was surprised to see some 6s. So I want to ask about the 6s first.
Yeah.
In particular, I remember this one I just was surprised you read it. I remember it from grade school. Don Quixote. You rated a 6.
It's a classic. I was disappointed. Right. It was Don Quixote is a clown. I thought it was funny at times, but funny, I guess, if you're living in the 1600s. But it was interesting. I got about halfway through it. It's a monster book. It actually comes usually in 2 volumes. If you look at it in the hardback classics, so I read not even the whole first volume of Don Quixote. I was actually inspired to read that, Bobby, now that you asked, because we have a print downstairs of Don Quixote, and my aunt was like, this was your great grandmother's print. It's Don Quixote. And now when I look at it, I'm just like, this is like a comic poster, even though it's an antique, when I think of the guy. Right. So what else do you have?
Let's see. What else we got? We got a 6 out of The Law of Success.
So I actually yeah, there's actually some blue chips to be taken from that book. And I can't remember exactly why I rated it that low. There's just some things I can read it to you. That are, go ahead.
It says classic self-help biz book, same era as Dale Carnegie, but not as polished. Some good applications. His bizarre cult-like beliefs permeate. Take with shaker of salt. Wow.
Full shaker. Yeah. He's just got some bizarre opinions that don't seem to be substantiated in anything. He doesn't give reasons for some of these bizarre ideas. And but again, there are some good takeaways in The Law of Success. A lot of people have found it helpful in business. Some of the principles hidden in that book.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'm steering clear. It's a 6, and I trust your judgment, Alex. Now one that I know you rated it a 10, and you've read it, I think, 5 times. Okay. And I think there's some family history with this book called The One Thing.
Right.
And you got me so excited about it in Student of Intention in our weekly meetings that I picked it up. And man, I'm only through chapter 7, and I'm already just kind of washed over with excitement, with passion, with just trust in this methodology, trust in the teachings, trust in to some extent, common sense, right? It's like ignored common sense is what I would liken it to. But tell me about your experience and why you've read it 5 times.
So I'm a little bit biased. So the one thing was written by my cousin, co-written by my cousin, Jay Papasan. He grew up in New Albany, Mississippi, right up the road from where I live here in Oxford, Mississippi. He co-wrote it with Gary Keller. Gary Keller is the founder and CEO of Keller Williams Real Estate. This is the largest real estate company in the world, one of the largest in the world. And it was my cousin had already co-written a number of books for Keller Williams on real estate. They were all real estate books. This was the first book that he wrote. He actually researched the book for 5 or 6 years. It's a 200-page book. He had like 1,000 pages of content that he wanted to put in that book, and they boiled it down to 200 pages because they wanted that to be a book, just like I did to you, Bobby, where I could say, here, read this book. This is a quick read, and it has the biggest bang for your buck per page of any book that I'm aware of for this topic. The one thing, the topic is, it would be classified as a business/personal development book. It doesn't necessarily have to be business, right, because you can apply these time-saving principles. They're timeless. And many of them we already know about, things like don't multitask, time block your most important time. People know about Pareto's law. A lot of people do. That's the 80-20. He says, what if you take your 80-20 of your 20 most important things that you do and 80-20 that to where you have one thing, what is the most impactful thing that you can do today in each category of your life? So in the morning, I'll circle what my one thing for work is today. I'm going to do this. This has such a big impact that everything else may be totally unnecessary. Everything else I was going to do today is now unnecessary because this had such a major impact on my business. And that can be applied to all kinds of personal goals and relationships. And we have adopted many of the principles in this book at our company. We were talking about the 5-hour workday earlier, and you cannot be more productive than someone working 8 or 9 hours in 5 hours without time blocking and having a laser focus on your workday. So to me, it's invaluable, and I read it at the beginning of every year. This is the 5th time I read it. Back in January was the 5th time I read it.
Yeah, there's a lot of fascinating paths we can go down. So let's do it. One, let's start with your cousin. Let's start with Jay. So I read, I also checked out his TED Talk, which, by the way, is awesome. It was only like, what I just love about TED Talks is they're short. They're like 15 minutes, and
that's right,
you can just pull some beauties out of it.
Concise. And he's articulate.
That's right.
That's a fun TED Talk.
Yeah. He even talks about he actually starts by talking about the need to be intentional about reading. Oddly enough, he talks about how he used to, I don't know if he still does this, but he also wanted to read 50 books a year. And he said he inevitably always failed. I think he still felt good. He'd usually read, 20 or so. Mm-hmm. But then he brought up this fact that, like, no matter how many he reads, it's infinite. There's no way he can get it all into his head. I think he said there's 15,000 business books a year.
That's right. Just in his category. Yeah. So just in the category of the one thing, there's 15,000 new books published in the United States in English per year, meaning if he read all of those books, it would take him 300 years to read, assuming he's actually hitting his goal of reading 50 a year. It's mind-boggling. So these principles of being intentional about what you read are timeless.
Right. And then he takes it from reading and dovetails it into other areas where if we're clear about our one constraint that we just don't get more of, we can give ourselves clarity of how we want to spend our time, right? Time is that one constraint. Time is that one resource we don't get back. So he also gives a nice example about going on spring break with his kids.
Right.
And he talks about how during the height of getting that book done, and a very busy time in Keller Williams' world, and I think it was a busy time for his wife. She might have started a new job or something. They decided for their spring break with their children to do a staycation, to sort of just stay at the home in Austin. And it was kind of, he sort of led on like, that was my way of letting myself off the hook, of saying, you know, really, I'm just too busy and I don't want to prioritize the spring break with my kids. So I'm just going to con myself and my kids to some extent into that. This is a beautiful thing. We're just going to stay home. And he said he went in to talk to, I believe it was Gary, right?
That's right.
Is his partner's name. And Gary
he
said,
reports directly to Gary. That's right.
And he said, do you remember what he said?
Yeah, I mean, what Gary Keller said, he kind of tore into him. He said, you don't have, he said, what are you doing? You don't have many of these left. Because he normally takes his kids on exotic vacations to the beach or the mountains.
Right. He's like, you only have, if you're lucky, you have 10 left, right? Then your kids are going to want to go with friends. Maybe they're just not going to want to spend time with you at all. And it gave Jay a pause where he's like, wow, you know, if I only have 10 left, is this really how I want to spend, this vacation? And right. And we can go on down the list. Now, the funny thing is, I mean, just to put a pin in this story, he does come around to saying years later, after all the crazy excursions, some of them very exotic locations, right? I think he went to the Galapagos Islands with his kids, which that sounds wonderful. I didn't go there for spring break, so
Me neither.
I'm jealous. But he does say, after several years, he went and, of course, he asked the kids, well, what was your favorite one ever? I think his wife said that. And what do they say?
Staycation.
They say, staycation. Staycation was the best one.
Classic.
So the final thing I got out of it, and then I want to transition to talking more about the book. But this was great. This gave me, I just watched this today. So I was already feeling surrounded in just prosperity, abundance, excited about my path. And then he gives me this gold, which if anybody listening, you know, if you're listening right now, you take nothing else from this podcast, take this little gem from Jay's TED Talk, which is this idea of starting from the end. He actually brings up a maze. He brings up a maze analogy. And if you're, a maze that you follow with a pencil and try to get through. And if you start at the beginning of the maze, right, there's maybe 100 ways that you could try to figure out how to get to the end of the maze. Versus if you start at the end of the maze, you kind of cheat, right? You can start at the end of the maze and easily draw your way back to the appropriate entrance. And so he says, use this metaphor for life, particularly for your dreams. Right? If there's something you've been dreaming of doing and you want to match it up with today and how to start today, well, think about it 10 years into the future, right? What does that outcome look like? And then back that into 5 years and then 1 year and then 6 months. Pretty soon you get down to a very small action that you can do today, right? And we can all eat up those bite-sized actions. And that is how we sort of look at our context of time. And in my own world, right, as I do this transition, this month going into June is really interesting for me because it's like all of 2020, I've sort of been in this new world, right? This new world of finally writing a book, of finally starting to do some creative pursuits that I've kind of always wanted to do. And in doing so, I'm sort of leaning away from a career that I've always done and a way of living that I've always done. And I'd be lying if I didn't say I was a little uncomfortable, maybe even a lot uncomfortable. But I did that exercise and I said, 10 years from now, I want to have written I wanted to have written maybe half a dozen books. I'd like to, be sharing my story, my lessons with others through coaching, through events, through speaking engagements. I'd love to still have a podcast going, love to still have a community going. And if that's true, then I back down to 5 years and I back down to 1 year and I back down to today. Oh, good news is I'm on the right path, right? I don't have to think about that 10-year mark because right now I know I'm doing those things right.
That's right. I love that. That is spot on. I'm so glad that you took the time to be intentional and go through that exercise, because it is a challenging exercise that will make your mind hurt. But once you get in the flow of it, it's a blast. It's fun because you start getting so excited about all these little things, what they're adding up to be in the future. And the way they describe it, and I don't know, you've probably already gotten to this part in the book, in the one thing, it's the domino effect.
Oh, the domino effect. I'm glad you brought that up. That's early.
So what you just described, when you go back the other direction, you're looking at these little incremental things. If you just start, what is your motto, Bobby? Start small, learn as you go.
Start small, learn as you go.
All right. So you take that methodology to writing, and you write a paragraph, a page. Next, you have 2 pages. A couple weeks later, you have 50 pages. Next, you have a manuscript of a book. Next, you're editing a manuscript of a book. It's just small incremental things. And the domino effect was, if you have a domino lined up and then a domino twice that size, that domino can knock over a domino twice its size. And that force will continue on. And by the time you get to, it's only 38 dominoes, you've got a domino the size of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And then once you get to like 50 something, you're knocking over the Eiffel Tower. By the time you get to, I think it was, 60 something, you're knocking over a domino the height of Mount Everest. And it goes all the way up to like the moon within less than 100 dominoes. Just by each domino doubling.
It hits you, at least hit me real hard. I think it's literally in the first 20 pages. And it's just that idea of compounding effects, right? Like we talk about compounding interest, which I think none of us still really grasp in finance. But to hear it put out that way with regards to our passions, right? With regards to our creative pursuits, whatever it is that we want to do, this idea, and put it plain and simple, like a physical thing like a domino, that this little tiny domino, if you start with just a little regular sized domino and double that domino in size, 30 later, 50 later, etc., this little thing, this little energy, this little just moment is responsible for knocking down something the size of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, or eventually the moon, right? The space, the distance from the moon to the Earth. It's just mind blowing.
That's right. It's wild. And it's a great exercise. I think it's something that, we could challenge our listeners to try. And yeah, it's awesome. And it's just all these little, and that's, again, it's the learning bucket where like you read a book, you read a page, you learn something new each day. It doesn't have to be anything huge, and they just have a compounding effect on your life. But there has to be that focus too. That's the whole point of the one thing as well. It's like, find your focus. That's why you have to go so far out. I forgot what the analogy was about the jet, but if a jet takes off in New York heading to LA, if it's off by just a half of a degree, it'll end up in like Alaska instead of Los Angeles. So trying to get real clear on where you're going is the hardest part, and the most important part, and then just working back incrementally. It gets a little bit easier the closer you get to now.
Yeah, I wrote down one of my favorite little parts. It's a quote from the book. It's a chapter called Everything Matters Equally. Mm-hmm. And it reads, "There will always be just a few things that matter more than the rest. And out of those, one will matter most. Internalizing this concept is like being handed a magic compass. Whenever you feel lost or lacking direction, you can pull it out to remind yourself to discover what matters most." And I think that's the other side of it. We've been talking about the exponential impact, right, of doing just these small things. right? And how they can add up to really big outcomes, right? Like you can shift your career, you can live out your dream, you can make, whatever number of money that you want to make, amount of money, I should say. The other side of it that I really like in that quote is this centeredness, this anchor, right? Because that's another part is like, decision fatigue, right? Or optionality is a thing, right? Where we're just like, we're overwhelmed with options. Whereas like, if you can just take this moment, take a breather, find exactly what it is, that one thing that you want to anchor around, you're going to inevitably feel lost. I'm sure you feel lost from time to time, right?
Absolutely.
In this path of life, I feel lost almost every day. But when I thought of that, when I read that sentence, when I start reading this book, I'm like, I know this one thing. I definitely want to write. I definitely want to be a writer. I want to complete more books. And so no matter how spread thin I get, no matter how distracted I get, no matter how many options are on the table, I can bring myself to writing.
I love it. And the most important thing is that you're learning as you go and you're enjoying the journey. Like you truly enjoy writing. It makes that future goal seem so much more feasible. We have a famous resident here in Oxford, Mississippi that used to live across the street from my granddad, graduated law school from Ole Miss Law. Like my granddad, John Grisham. He's
famous enough.
He writes a couple novels. Yeah, we were talking about Matthew McConaughey earlier. He was in, I think it was A Time to Kill in the movie of one of John Grisham's stories. Anyway, what I wanted to say is he spends, how many hours a day do you think he spends writing? If you had to guess.
John Grisham?
Mm-hmm.
4?
You hit it on the head. He spends 4 hours per day writing. And that's really all he does. He has other people handle all the other administrative stuff. So his work day, I work a 5 to 6 hour work day is my benchmark. He's working a 4 hour work day. He comes in and he said that he has a writing routine where he locks the door, has a computer with no internet access, has the same cup of coffee, same coffee mug, same seat, gets into his zone, and he has a methodology, and it works for him. He cranks out a couple novels a year. So
yeah, it's powerful. I must admit that guess came from, I know Stephen Pressfield, my favorite author, claims to do a 4 hour workday every day, and he doesn't do anything else. He literally writes for 4 hours. He says a prayer. I think he recites a piece of the Odyssey as sort of his inviting the muse into his work, sits down, writes for 4 hours, and then tosses it away. Doesn't do anything work related the rest of the day. So that might be the magic number for writers.
We were talking about the book club that we have at our company. We're reading a book right now called Peak, and it's Secrets from the New Science of Expertise. It's these 2 PhD guys have been studying work performance and like world-class performers, their peak performance for over a decade. And the aggregate that they came up with was 4.5 hours. So the greatest top performers in the world average 4.5 hours per day on their trade, on their primary trade. And they're world class. They're known. So I'm looking forward to digging into that book. But again, that it seems daunting when you're looking at these someday goals, but it doesn't take that much time.
For sure. Now, I want to share with the people that are listening, right? Like, this isn't us saying, hey, you have to go do, you have to go be a writer for 4 hours a day, right? Like, you're not a writer. You've read this book 5 times. You're a family man, a very committed father and family man at that. You've read this book 5 times, particularly, I think you just read it again. Like, what's your takeaways? What are you taking into everyday Alex life?
Each time I read a book that is a great book, a book that I enjoy enough to read 5 times, every time I read it, I learn something new from it. The last time I read it, I was particularly interested in more tactical things. I got the big picture stuff the first couple times. This last time I read it was tactical. It was about time blocking. I want to be ninja level time blocking. I'm trying to do an enormous workload in 5 hours. That's crazy. I'm done with my workday in 5 hours if I execute my time blocks on time precisely. It's not super easy, but there's a lot of techniques later in this book about some of those advanced time blocking techniques. You'll appreciate them when you apply them to what you do. So.
Yes. So let's, I guess don't ruin the book for me. I'm going to blitz through it. I think I could probably get done this week, and then I'm going to read it again. I'm going to listen to James and read it again.
Absolutely.
You do one interesting time blocking technique that I just think it's worth sharing with the listeners. It's interesting to the entire community.
Okay.
Has to do with their cell phones. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah. So are you talking about just eliminating distractions during time block?
Sure. You have a very specific way though that I think is super interesting.
Are you talking about where I put, are you talking about at the end of my workday? So at the end of my workday.
That's right. Yeah, this is outside of workday. This is because again, the one thing, and we're talking about prioritization. We're talking about time well spent. We're talking about intention. Even after work is done, you do something I think that is novel.
Yeah. So at the end of every workday, I book in my days. I learned this from my CEO. So at the end of the day, I book in that day. I call it my daily shutdown. And once I shut down my day, I am done with work. So I can now focus my energy. What a lot of my buddies, we call it fourth quarter, to try to pump each other up. It's fourth quarter. Fourth quarter is that last push to spend time with your family. So I have two habits that simultaneously happen. I walk in the door. I greet my wife first before my kids. That's important to my wife. I greet her first. And then second, I take my cell phone and I put it in a cabinet on a charger and I lock it. And my wife and I, during those precious couple hours after I get off work, between work and dinner time, really until the kids go to bed, our cell phones are put away. We're not looking at our cell phones.
So that's your shutdown practice. You're done with your day. You've put away your work. After your 5-hour workday, you first take a moment to receive your wife, to embrace your wife, to recognize her presence and be present with her. It's beautiful. And then you put your cell phone in a closet?
Yeah, I have a charging cabinet that the kids can't get into, and I lock it. And my wife and I, we both have a dock where our cell phones click in, and we just put our phones away and forget about them. And we go outside, we read to our kids, we play games, we do art projects, we dance, sing, cook as a family. We do whatever it is that we have planned for that night, or whatever is important to our kids or important to us that does not have to do with our cell phones. I've been on the phone all day. I don't want to look at that cell phone until I absolutely have to.
Beautiful practice, man. Great practice. I think since you've mentioned that in the community, I've somewhat informally adopted that practice. I turned off my phone notifications several months ago, which I also think is really interesting. Now that I do it, I just thought of this the other day too, because my friend Taylor had asked about notifications. I don't even remember what it was like to have notifications. So if anybody, listening is on the edge of trying to get that done and kind of nervous about it, just know that you'll be okay. I did that a long time ago, and it's great. And I think a less sort of fearful practice is the one that you do. Locking it up after hours. Get rid of that thing.
Just if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. And I promise you, when I'm having a blast with my family after I'm done with work, I'm decompressing from my job. I do have to psych myself up sometimes because my kids are running to me and I'm like, oh, I just got done with work. Like my brain hasn't even stopped spinning. So I do have to kind of psych myself up. Sometimes I'll do a quick prayer before I go downstairs, especially if I've had a stressful day at work. And I just help me get into this mode where I can be the best husband for my wife and the best father I possibly can be. And it's about being intentional. And I have to get into that mode. And again, I think that my buddies and I, we try to motivate each other. So we said, if we're driving home from work, hang the fork. And you see what I'm doing? You know, the football players in the fourth quarter, they put their fingers up the fourth quarter. That's what we're doing. We're just pumping each other up. We're like, you're not done with work. You're about to go home and fourth quarter is about to begin and you've got to finish strong. Greet your wife, do whatever you have to do. Just enjoy that sweet little moment with your wife, with your partner, and then go have that fun time with your kids. And I promise you will not miss your cell phone. You just won't. You won't be thinking about it.
Well, I asked this question because I want to know, and because I know you're a humble person. But man, you're so intentional. You're so intentional about what you read, about how you work, right down to how you greet your wife every single day. Is there anything you want to get some attention around?
Do you mean new intentions, or what do you mean by that?
It's like, again, you're a pretty intentional guy. So I don't know if you even have an answer to this question, but I'm just genuinely curious, particularly because I know you're humble and you'll be honest. Is there anything that's just like, man, I definitely want to be more intentional about this?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, there's so much room for improvement. There's so many different areas of my life where I need to be more intentional. A lot of them have to do with relationships. I pour so much into my wife and my kids. I need to pour, there's so many other people that are important in my life that I can glean from, wisdom and knowledge from. I need to I have to go out of my way to be intentional with people outside of my house, especially since this past year in 2020, I've just been stuck inside. So being intentional, get out. That's huge. You know, there's health goals that I'm falling short on. So maybe I could share this just real briefly. Is the methodology at the beginning of the day? I talked about how I bookend my day. I have a ritual in the morning and I have a ritual at the end of the day. We talked about what I do at the end of the day. At the beginning of the day, we can call them buckets, 6 buckets or 6 areas that I track. And I rate myself from 1 to 10 in 6 areas. 1 is sleep. 1, and I better have a 9 or 10 in sleep or the rest are pretty much doomed. Eat. Did I eat well? Pray. Am I in the right mental health? And this means, am I praying throughout the day? Am I eating well throughout the day? Rest. Am I taking rest? Am I taking intentional breaks? If I'm redlining, is what my boss calls it. If you go like more than 2 hours just hammering away at one thing, you'll get burned out. You've got to take even just a 5-minute intentional walk around the yard has a huge impact. Sleep, eat, pray, rest, breathe. Am I taking some deep breaths during the day through my nose? You know, and then last, move. Am I doing something physical during the day? And my weakest link, Bobby, is probably out of those kind of energy checkpoints would be move. I don't have a real regimented workout routine. I'm active with my kids, but it's kind of random. based off of if the weather's good, we're outside running around. If the weather's not good, I might be just sitting inside reading or doing an art project. So that's an area I could be more intentional.
Got it. All right. Well, love that morning ritual. Sleep, eat, pray, rest, breathe, move.
You got it.
And you rate yourself on
1 to 10
on sort of how you did the day before?
Every day.
So what was today's rating? What was today's rating?
Today was 10 sleep, 10 eat, 7 pray, 7 breathe, 7 rest, and 8 move. So it's kind of the opposite of what it normally is. Normally move is lower and pray and rest are higher. But
well, that's great. And why was move so high then?
I wanted to get my blood flowing so I would be in the zone. I was feeling a little tired before this podcast, and I wanted to get my blood flowing, so I did a bunch of push-ups and did some got my blood flowing.
Epic, dude.
Earlier today.
Epic.
Yeah.
I love it, man. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, man, I've really enjoyed this conversation. And love the book, The One Thing, and that YouTube by Jay that TED Talk, I should say, on YouTube. Thank you so much for bringing that into my world. Thank you for sharing your morning practice, your evening practice, your way of organizing books. I want to make sure you get the most out of this pod. Is there anything you want to ask me? Is there anything else you want to cover? Because we're running up here on time and want to let you get back to your family.
I've had a blast. These are all topics that we could spend a lot more time talking about. These are things we're passionate about, especially reading. We could definitely talk about some book recommendations. One topic we didn't touch on too much was learning to learn. So if someone is learning to write, which is your passion, what would you recommend? Where do they start? Is there a book, a magic book that they can read that teaches them how to write or gets them inspired?
I'm going to give one author, and she's number 2 to Stephen Pressfield, my favorite authors. Her name is Julia Cameron, and there's 2 books I'd recommend. Number 1 is The Artist's Way. It's like a 25-year-old book, the famous book. In it, she details a practice called morning pages, where you write unprompted sort of brain dumping for 3 pages every single day for 12 weeks. And it unlocks the creativity in anyone, let alone aspiring writers. And then she also wrote a book that I recently read that's more geared towards writers specifically, and it's called The Right to Write. So that would be my recommendation for anybody, particularly the Artist's Way, any aspiring creative. I think it's good for business too.
I love it.
But all things Julia Cameron. Speaking of, I know this is another one of my favorite things about you. You want to get intentional about listening, which, man, what a great quality to have.
This is a hard one.
I told you a book about Julia Cameron. Did you hear it? Did you read it? Did you buy it?
All right. So I've researched it pretty extensively.
Have you?
We can talk about it offline, but I definitely have some opinions on that. But I'm very interested in digging into this more. And I think I do want to start off with The Artist's Way. Everything I read said, start with The Artist's Way on that particular book, by the way, Bobby. So thank you for sharing those recommendations. And I'll probably put at least The Artist's Way, if not the other one. These are big undertakings, if I remember. This is not just like reading a book. This is very involved. Writing 3 pages per day for 12 weeks.
First
I can't commit to that until I'm really ready to commit to it, but that is some great recommendations.
That's right.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing. It takes me anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. I do it as soon as I wake up. I'm doing it right now. It was one of those practices that somebody put on my radar 2 years ago, I want to say. And like a lot of good things in our life, I got a ton of value out of it, loved it, and then stopped doing it. And then, fortunately, my co-captain here in the studio, Chris Decker, put it back in my hands and said, "Hey man, let's recommit to this." Mm-hmm. And we've been doing the morning pages now for, I want to say 4 weeks. But you're right. It's an undertaking. So figure out when you want to do it.
Absolutely.
But you don't have to be in any hurry.
But listening is something we will continue to motivate each other to improve, because I always have a lot of things I want to talk about, and I have to be humble and remind myself that the other person has probably even more things that are interesting that I can learn from that they want to talk about. So I need to work on brevity, being concise. This is a science that has to be practiced and studied, and it's an ongoing lifetime journey of learning. A big portion of that is how well we listen and comprehend, and how we're able to get our points across briefly.
Beautiful, man. Well, thanks again for joining Student of Intention, and I know I'll see you soon. Enjoy the family this evening.
Absolutely. Sounds like a plan. Thanks, Bobby.
Hey, it's Bobby. Thanks for listening to today's show. For more, follow Student of Intention at www.studentofintention.com. And remember, don't wait, start small, learn as you go.